Hey there. Ready for a little trip to France today?
Sounds fun.
I've got a whole bunch of articles and links here all about France.
Oh, cool.
Travel, food, even some French culture sprinkled in.
Yeah.
We're going to dig through it all and find the most interesting stuff. Like, think of us as your shortcut to all things French.
Kind of like a curated France experience.
Exactly. It's like piecing together a puzzle, right?
Yeah.
What's happening in France right now? What's cool? What's important? Okay, first up, this article from the Love to Visit France newsletter really grabbed me.
I love that newsletter. What's it about?
It's all about slow travel in France on a riverboat. What do you think?
Oh, I love that idea. Everyone's so stressed these days. Just drifting along, taking in the scenery sounds so relaxing.
Right. And get this, you don't even need a license to rent these boats. No sailing experience required.
Seriously. That's amazing. It makes it so accessible.
I know, I was surprised too.
The newsletter mentions the Canal du Midi. Have you been there?
No, I haven't.
It's gorgeous. And it's not just any canal, it's a UNESCO World Heritage Site, built in the 17th century.
Wow. So you're really floating through history.
Exactly.
Okay, I am sold on this riverboat trip. But now, something a little less cheery from the Around the Web section. There's an article here called, "Is the Future of French Cheese at Stake?"
Oh no, what's going on?
I know, right? Brie, Camembert, could these be in danger?
I hope not.
It seems like a pretty complicated issue from what I've read. Something about new research on the molds used to make those cheeses.
Oh, I see. Yeah, that makes sense. It's not just about science, though, right? I feel like tradition and even economics play a role.
It does seem like a whole bunch of factors are coming together,
Yeah.
like a perfect storm brewing over a wedge of cheese.
The cheesy crisis.
Exactly. Okay, before I spiral into cheeseless despair, let's move on to something a bit more fun. There's an article here called "Discover Your Next Favorite Wine, a Guide to Hidden Gem Grapes."
Ooh, I'm always up for trying new wines.
Me too. Any hidden gems you recommend?
Let me think. If you like white wines, there's Jacquer. It's from the Savoie region, very crisp and dry, with these delicate floral notes. Or, if you're more of a red wine person, you could try Mencia. It's from northwestern Spain, known for its bright fruit flavors and a subtle spiciness.
Those sound amazing. I'll have to try them both. It's funny though, right? We're talking about the potential end of traditional cheese, but at the same time, digital art is exploding in France.
It's an interesting contrast.
The newsletter mentions 3 digital art centers, Provence, Paris, and Bordeaux. These massive, immersive installations.
You know, it really speaks to that mix of tradition and innovation you find in France. On one hand, these age-old practices like cheese making, and on the other, embracing cutting-edge technology and art.
It's like a cultural tug-of-war.
Yeah, but in a really cool way.
Back to the Around the Web section, there's a quick update that France has implemented border controls at its Schengen zone borders.
Oh, wow. That's a pretty big deal.
Yeah, I think so too. For those who don't know, the Schengen zone is basically this area in Europe where you can travel freely between countries without passports.
Right. And this affects other countries too, right?
It does. The article specifically mentions Luxembourg, Belgium, Germany, Switzerland, Spain, and Italy.
I wonder how that'll impact travel and tourism.
Me too. It'll
Yeah.
be interesting to watch how that all unfolds. Also in the news, it looks like the Paris Opera, the Palais Garnier, will be closing for renovations.
Oh, of course. I mean, it's a beautiful building, but it's got to be pretty old.
Speaking of beautiful things to see, the last article here is Top 10 Places to Visit in Provence-Alpes-Côte d'Azur.
I love that region.
Lavender fields, the Alps, the French Riviera, all in one region.
It really is like a little slice of everything France has to offer.
Okay, lightning round through the rest of the newsletter. In the From Social Media section, they ask, how many days do you need in Strasbourg? What do you think?
Strasbourg is wonderful. I'd say at least 3 or 4 days to really appreciate it.
Good to know. Okay, Mange has a recipe for Fernand Point gratin d'oeufs, basically a baked egg dish.
Sounds delicious.
And finally, in Extra, there's a link to an ultimate guide to cruising the Canal du Midi with Le Boat.
Oh, perfect.
Yeah, so there you have it, our little tour of France. What stands out to you from all this?
You know, the contrast between tradition and innovation is really fascinating to me. Like the potential crisis in cheesemaking versus the digital art boom. It seems like France is trying to figure out how to preserve its heritage while also moving forward.
It's like walking a tightrope.
Exactly. And I think it's a question a lot of cultures are grappling with, right? How do you hold on to the past while embracing the future?
It's a great question. We've only just scratched the surface here, but hopefully this has sparked your curiosity about France.
You know, it's amazing how this deep dive is showing us all these different sides of France.
I know, right? It's not just one thing. It's like a whole bunch of layers. We've got the beautiful Canal du Midi, and then bam, a potential cheese crisis.
Exactly. And I think that's what makes France so interesting. It's a country that holds onto its traditions, but also isn't afraid to try new things.
It's like they're saying, we're proud of our past, but we're not stuck there.
Exactly. And that idea shows up everywhere, from their food to their art scene. Like you have this deep respect for how things have always been done, like with cheese making. But then there's this whole embrace of new technologies and digital art.
That's a cool mix, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is. Thinking about the Canal du Midi, what do you think all this slow travel stuff says about like where we are right now, culturally, I mean?
That's a good question. I feel like it shows that people are craving something real, something meaningful.
Right. Like in a world that's always running, always online, people want to slow down, connect with nature, connect with other cultures.
It's like hitting the brakes on all the crazy.
Exactly. Slow travel is all about being present, savoring the journey. And with something like the Canal du Midi, you really are moving at the pace of the water. You can't help but slow down and notice the little things.
Isn't that what travel should be about? Really experiencing a place, letting it change you.
Absolutely. It's about opening yourself up to new perspectives, new ways of seeing the world.
I also feel like slow travel goes hand in hand with like sustainability and responsible tourism.
Oh, for sure. You're supporting local communities, trying to minimize your impact on the environment, and really engaging with the culture. Thinking about those boats on the Canal du Midi, they're not these huge gas-guzzling yachts. They're smaller, sometimes even electric.
Right. So you're not just seeing beautiful scenery. You're doing it in a way that's a bit gentler on the planet.
Exactly. Okay, let's talk about this cheese situation. This is serious business for cheese lovers.
I know. What do you make of all these challenges to traditional cheese making?
It's complicated. You've got these traditions that have been around for centuries, making some of the most delicious cheeses in the world, like brie and camembert. They need specific molds to get that perfect flavor and texture.
Like, those cheeses aren't just food, they're part of French culture.
Right. But then you've got new scientific research and regulations that are questioning whether some of these traditional ways are safe or even sustainable. There are worries that these molds are getting harder to control, leading to inconsistencies in the cheese.
It's like they're caught between a rock and a hard place.
Yeah.
How do you keep those traditions alive while also making sure the cheese is safe and high quality?
It's a tricky balance. It needs cheesemakers, scientists, and regulators all talking to each other and working together. And this isn't just a French problem. Cheesemakers everywhere are dealing with similar stuff as rules change and what people want in their cheese evolves.
It's about finding ways to respect tradition while also keeping up with the times and making sure everyone's safe.
Exactly. And we have to remember that tradition isn't frozen in time. It changes over time, adapts to new situations, takes in new knowledge.
That's a good point. It's not about clinging to the past no matter what, but figuring out how to keep the heart of the tradition alive as things change around it. Okay, let's lighten things up a bit. Who knew digital art was such a big deal in France? It's not the first thing that comes to mind when you think about France.
Right, but when you think about it, France has always been a leader in art and culture, so it makes sense that they'd be into this new form of expression too. These digital art centers, like the ones in Provence, Paris, and Bordeaux, are drawing huge crowds.
And it's not just about the tech either, right? They're showing both classic artists like Van Gogh and more modern artists in these really immersive ways.
Yeah.
You're not just looking at a painting, you're like stepping inside it.
Yeah, it's a whole different way of experiencing art, and it shows that they're willing to push the boundaries, experiment with new stuff.
Exactly. Digital art gives artists all these new tools to play with. It's exciting to see what they're doing with it.
It's a good example of how technology can actually make art even better. It's not about replacing the old ways, but adding to them.
And digital art can be more than just pretty pictures, right? It can be used to talk about important issues, just like any other art form.
Oh, absolutely. It can tell stories, make people think, raise awareness about important stuff. It lets artists connect with people in totally new ways.
Okay, let's talk about France's decision to bring back border controls at the Schengen zone borders. This is a big change. What do you think?
It's definitely something to watch. The Schengen Agreement was a huge deal for Europe. It let people move freely between countries, which helped to bring everyone closer and boosted trade and tourism.
And while it's understandable that countries want to be safe, we have to think about what this means for travel, trade, and even just the idea of a united Europe.
It's a tough balancing act between security and keeping borders open. I wonder how other Schengen countries will react. Will they start putting their border controls back in place too?
It's going to be interesting to see how this all plays out. It's a good reminder that even agreements and systems that seem really solid can change when things happen.
True. Okay, on a lighter note, I'm glad we talked about the Paris Opera closing for renovations. The Palais Garnier is such a landmark.
I know, it's beautiful. And it shows that even those iconic places need some TLC to stay beautiful and historically important.
It'll be amazing to see it after the renovations. It'll be this amazing blend of the old and the new. They'll have to be really careful to keep the historical parts intact while making sure it's up to modern standards.
I can't wait to see pictures. I bet the reopening celebration will be huge. Speaking of celebrations, let's not forget our virtual trip to Strasbourg. I'm still thinking about those charming streets and the delicious food.
Ah, Strasbourg. That perfect mix of French and German influences. History, beauty, and amazing food.
I'm convinced I have to go.
No.
And we can't forget about that Fernand Point recipe.
We have to try it out, for sure. Maybe we can pair it with one of those hidden gem wines we talked about earlier.
Now you're talking. This deep dive has covered so much ground. From slow travel and cheese making to digital art and border controls, it's been quite a journey.
It really shows you how diverse France is. It's a country that loves its traditions, but is also excited about the future, and there's something there for everyone.
It's a place where the past and present come together in this really cool way.
And it never stops surprising us with its beauty, culture, and people.
Well said. I think we're both even more in love with France now.
Me too! I hope our listeners feel the same way.
Back for one last dip into all things French. Can you believe how much we've covered?
I know, right? From peaceful canals to, the fate of cheese. It's kind of amazing.
It really shows how much there is to France.
Yeah.
It's not just one thing. And I think that's a big takeaway for anyone listening.
For sure. You don't have to pick between the past and the future. France shows us you can have both.
Exactly. And we saw that balance everywhere we looked, like that slow travel on the Canal du Midi.
Right. It's like a way to escape the craziness of modern life, but it's also about connecting with history, with nature.
It's like, yeah, you're slowing down, but you're not just zoning out. You're really experiencing things.
Totally. And you don't need to be an expert sailor or anything. I love that it's open to everyone.
Me too. It makes those kinds of trips way more accessible.
Okay, but then we had that whole cheese crisis thing. A little scary for us cheese fans.
I know, but it makes you think, doesn't it? Doing things the old way versus new science and rules.
It's tough, right?
Yeah.
You want to honor the traditions, but you also want to be safe and keep up with the times.
Yeah, it's a tricky one. And it's not just about mold either. It's economics too.
Oh, right. Those small cheesemakers are up against these big companies.
Exactly. And people want their cheese to be the same every time. So is this just a France problem, or are cheesemakers all over dealing with this stuff?
Good question. What do you think?
I think it's happening everywhere, but it hits France especially hard. Cheese is such a big part of their culture, their identity. It's more than just food there.
That's a good point. It shows that globalization, even though it can be good, sometimes has downsides too.
For sure. But there's some good news.
More and more people are starting to care about where their food comes from, and they're supporting those small producers. So maybe there's hope for traditional cheese both in France and around the world.
That's good to hear. Okay, totally different topic. Digital art in France. Who would have guessed?
Right. You don't usually think of France and cutting-edge technology together, but it makes sense when you think about it. They've always been all about art and culture, so why not embrace this new way of doing things?
Yeah, it's like they're not afraid to experiment. And these digital art centers, they sound amazing, like these huge immersive experiences.
Yeah. Like that Atelier de Lumière in Paris, they use tons of video projectors to make these giant moving murals on the walls and floors.
Wow. That sounds so cool.
It's like you're not just looking at the art, you're part of it.
Yeah, a totally different way to experience art. Okay, back down to earth for a minute. That border control thing, it's kind of a bummer.
It is. It makes you wonder about Europe, They were supposed to be so unified.
Right. The Schengen Agreement was this huge deal. Now it feels like things are going backwards.
Yeah, we'll have to see how it all plays out. It could have a ripple effect.
For sure. Okay, on a brighter note, Strasbourg.
Such a cool city. That French and German mix is just something else.
I need to add it to my travel list. Oh, and we can't forget that Fernand Point recipe. We have to try that.
Yes, and maybe pair it with one of those special wines we talked about. That could be a whole other deep dive.
Now you're talking. This has been such a fun deep dive, from those peaceful canals to the cheese drama to digital art. We covered a lot. I hope this has made everyone listening want to learn even more about
Me
France.
too, because France is more than just like the Eiffel Tower and croissants, you know?
Right. It's a place that's full of surprises, where the old and the new come together in this really special way. So keep exploring, keep learning, and bon appetit.